Everyone, welcome in. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. So welcome. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started now. I will ask Sharon to start with introductions.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Q&A session all about CLIR's recently redesigned Digitizing Hidden Special Collections and Archives program. I'm Sharon Burney, and I'm a member of the CLIR's grants team, and today we're here to answer your questions about the currently open call for collections. This is going to be a relatively informal session, so we don't have a long presentation prepared for you. We just wanted to share a few slides to help you navigate this platform, get to know our team, and understand where to go for additional information. And if you haven't done it yet, we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. So tell us who you are and where in the world you live, and we'll get rolling. And remember to change the chat box from to panelists and attendees.
To start off, we'll just share a few notes about the platform. Unlike the first two webinars, we were unable to secure live transcriptions for this session. However, we will be providing the transcript of all of the questions that are asked and add captioning to the YouTube video once it's posted. So we do apologize for that. Because of how busy the chat can get, we do ask that you use the separate Q&A box to ask questions today. We'll start with some questions that were sent in during our registration process and then move on into the questions that you all have on the top of your mind today. If you are following along with those questions as they come in, you are able to upvote them. If you have something similar, that you see, then that will sort of move it up in our list. If we don't have time to get to all of the questions, we'll write up all of the responses to the remaining ones and post all of the answers online within the next few days on our applicant website. The Q&A session is being recorded and a transcript will be made available on the website by the end of the week.
So we want to do a brief introduction to our team, since each of us will be contributing to the question and answer period today. I'm Sharon Burney, and I live in Gainesville, Florida.
And I am Joy Banks. I'm down in South Florida.
And I'm Becca Kwan, and I'm in Riverside, California, all the way on the opposite coast. We want to extend our thanks to Krista Williford and Allison Pope, our colleagues from CLIR, who are helping us out with the Zoom logistics today. So Krista will be helping us to parse through all of the questions that come in and repeat them so everyone can hear them as we answer.
As a reminder from our introductory webinar, we want to direct everyone again to the applicant handbook, Perhaps our most essential resource, the handbook combines instructions and insights into the program and its application process. The handbook also serves as a space for you to draft responses to questions prior to adding them to our online grant platform. Links to view only Google Doc as well as to generate a copy are posted on the Apply for an Award program page. An updated version of the handbook will be shared with those invited to submit a final application to the program. One question we received a few times now is whether or not we have sample proposals to share, as CLIR has done in the past. Unfortunately, since this is the first iteration of the new application, we don't have any model proposals.
So we've done a couple other webinars on March 17th and March 30th, and we received over 150 questions at those two sessions. So we made sure to write out answers to all of them, and we will link to those in the chat. You can also find them on our applicant resources section of our website. So please look for those. It'll be the same webinars section that you used to get here today. So we're going to go ahead and get started with a few questions that we received when you all registered. And we'll go through each of those, answer them, and then we'll turn to the questions being submitted now. So the first one is, can there be two PIs serving as co-PIs, or will it be a PI with a secondary for the project? So who would like to answer that one?
I'll do that. The program allows applicants to name up to 3 PIs on a project. The first PI will be the primary PI in terms of administration for CLIR. However, all PIs will be included in communications. It is up to the applicants how they wish to divide responsibilities during the project, but all PIs named will take direct responsibility for completion of the project should funds be awarded.
Thank you. So the next one was pretty specific. This one was from the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean at York University in Toronto. So we sort of adapted it here so that it's more general and can apply to a number of situations. So if we're applying from a department or program within an organization, who sends the application to you? Should we include a letter of support? So the project team and PIs would determine who submits the proposal. It may be useful for reporting if funds are awarded to have that person, to have whoever will be reporting control the proposal submission process. So we recommend creating an account owned by one individual who will remain engaged throughout the project timeline. The lead organization listed on the application would be the legal name of the institution applying for the grant. So in this case, York University. If selected for funding, this organization would accept payment and assume all fiscal responsibility. So though the details of the final application haven't yet been finalized, we expect that an institutional letter of support will be required and would be sent from a head administrator at the overall organization. Our next question, let me get the slide changed here. We'd like to propose a project about a diverse community in Canada with a goal to go into the community and seek the hidden collections in order to tell a more full community history. Would the communities be partners or resources? And are we still eligible to apply? So I'll let someone else answer this one.
I can take this one. In terms of eligibility, the as a Canadian museum, you are eligible to apply. However, this project seems to be describing collection activities, and that is outside the scope of this program. If you had collections that existed and were owned and held by eligible organizations, then you could propose a project that would digitize those materials. And if there were organizations submitting these materials to your project, they would likely be collaborators. But based on the question that we received, we actually think that the project was likely ineligible and outside the scope. If you have more questions about that and want to clarify, we do always welcome emails to the team at hiddencollections@clir.org, and we can answer more specifically.
Excellent. The next one we got was, how should multiple partners construct their application? So I'll ask Sharon to start us with this one.
Okay. There are a few things to keep in mind when putting together an application for a collaborative project. In other words, a project with multiple formal collaborators. So while the lead organization will submit the application, any organization named as a collaborator will provide substantial responsibilities for and interest in the project. Collaborative projects should model authentic partnerships. So while the application construction will vary based on the project, key components of successful collaboration or collaborative proposals: execute clear communication of detailed role definitions, goals and deliverables, equitable voice in decision-making, possibly the utilization of memorandums of understanding. Components like these are vital to the construction of the project plan and technical plan, where reviewers will be assessing the application for possible funding. If you are designing a formal collaborative project, remember that all collaborating organizations are required to meet the same eligibility criteria as the lead applicant organization, and if advanced to submit a final application, will be expected to provide proof of eligibility and an institutional letter of support. If the project is recommended for funding, all organizations in the collaborative project will be expected to sign an intellectual property IP agreement. And you can find a link to this under the CLIR website, under more equitable partnerships and grant funding, or designing equitable partnerships.
Yeah, and I also put together a slide that shows the difference between the two different ways that we think about partnerships for the program. So there are the formal collaborators that will sign on to your application and will be required to sign that IP agreement. These folks will, like Sharon said, be really central to the project. And then other partners within the wider community who may be contributing in smaller ways. So I hope that that helps to clarify some of the questions about how you actually construct your application and who should be involved. But we're happy to answer any others that you have after getting all of that information. So I will hop back to slide 12 for our next question. This one was, our materials require organization and documentation. Will our lack of organization of the collections hinder our application? I'll send that one to Joy, maybe.
Okay. We do not require a minimum level of description for processing prior to application. However, applicants are expected to have a fairly complete understanding of the size, the scope, and the condition of the materials that you're nominating for digitization. And that is kind of a requirement of developing your budget. We do recognize, though, that some of this preparatory work or processing, as it's referred to in archivist terms, is activities like description, organization, stabilization, they're often needed in order to digitize a collection and provide the access that you'd like to provide. So the program does allow for project plans that include this kind of work, and we also allow for a limited amount of funds for supplies and equipment that would help in specifically the stabilization and rehousing costs that you might have. So there's a limit of up to $10,000 for all equipment and supplies in total for your project. And that might include like new boxes and folders. You are also able to request funds for treatment needed for the stabilization necessary to safely digitize materials, but the program does disallow conservation costs that would not be deemed necessary for digitization. All of that is in Appendix B, which describes the budget in more detail in our applicant handbook. So we highly recommend taking a look at that and studying it. All of these expenses will need to be detailed and explained and justified in the budget materials that you submit for our reviewers to assess. And sort of the final part of that question involves some questions about staffing, and staffing is supported by the program and would be highly recommended if you need staffing to do the work.
Fantastic, thanks, Joy. The next one was our repository will need to do a national search to hire a project archivist for our project. Can reasonable and fair costs associated with searches and hiring a professional archivist, such as travel for in-person interviews and relocation expenses for the new hire, be included in the budget? So we chatted about this before hopping on, because it's something that we had to think about a little bit. So our answer is that these expenses could fit within two established budget categories for a project. Interview expenses could fit within the funds for travel that is essential to carry out the proposed project. And then relocation expenses could be included as a fringe benefit for the grant-funded position alongside other benefits that will be included, with an explanation about the amount for each of those. So remember that all expenses must be strongly justified. We'll want to know why relocation expenses would be helpful, or why the interview process needs to be funded through this grant. And awards may only be applied to expenses accrued after a project's start date. So you'll need to build the search process into your project timeline if you're including these activities in your budget. We just have one more, and then we'll turn to your questions. Get those in. The last one is our organization, which recently received funds from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, eligible for the CLIR grant. So someone else can answer this one.
I'll take this one. Previous or active funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation does not have an impact on eligibility or evaluation of proposals to the Digitizing Hidden Collection Program. While research-related costs for this project would be out of the scope of funding for the program, additional digitization that builds on your established infrastructure and partnership could make for a great hidden collections project. So the project nominated to this program should be distinct from the Mellon-funded one with its own measurable outcomes that align with the hidden collections program values.
Awesome, thank you, Sharon. So now we'll get started with Krista's questions for us.
All right, let's start with one that we haven't received yet, I don't think. Is it digitize with a ZE or digitize with an SE? Who will the reviewers care?
Oh my gosh. I love this. I think most frequently in the US, you'll see it with a Z. but I know other places, perhaps Canada and definitely the UK, use an S. And either is completely fine. There's no right answer here for this program or in general. So yeah, a S will be fine.
All right. So I think there's a two-part question here and things got out of order. Perhaps. I don't know. I can't find part one.
The one from Nancy came in first, and then Emma's was the follow-up, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joy. The first part is for partners. Do we need MOUs or just for collaborators? So that is for the two categories of types of organizations that you might be partnering with. When do you need an MOU, or when is an MOU a good idea? Who wants to take that one?
I can take it. So for the initial application round, we are not requiring any specific documentation that formalizes your collaborations. We're asking you to list who the collaborators would be. We're asking you to name a potential contact at that collaborating organization. But other than that, for the initial application, we expect that there will likely still be some development in these relationships. And then, so the follow-up question to that was whether or not MOUs will be required for the initial stage, or if invited to stage 2. And in terms of what CLIR requires, an MOU would be a useful tool for you to use in establishing the terms of your project and how collaborators will work together. But we have never required MOUs to be submitted as part of either part of our application process. What we will be requiring likely in the final application will be institutional letters of support from all named collaborating organizations. And those should come from lead administrators at whatever organization it is who can speak to the specific proposal and say that the institution is supporting the project. If the award then, or if the project then is nominated for funding, that's when all collaborating organizations would be required to sign the intellectual property agreement that we have. And that doesn't function like an MOU either. So hopefully that's useful if you have MOUs. I think that in the past we've allowed space for other sort of support documentation. And if it seems reasonable, we can sort of accommodate that so the reviewers are more aware of the specifics of your agreements, but we've never required that as part of our application process. And I don't anticipate that we will. Okay, yeah, Krista's shaking her head no, so.
All right, next we have a little bit of an intricate question. Because of the broad geographic scope of the Indigenous fiddle collections we are proposing to digitize, and these collections span from at least 3 Canadian provinces, and likely there will be documentation of performances and performers from Montana and North Dakota performing at Canadian events. We will be partnering and consulting with more local organizations, families, and communities in order to do our outreach in an ethical manner. We are also proposing to create a website for easy access. Do these outreach outcomes, that is the consultation work and the website creation work, make sense for this CLIR project?
I can get started with this one. I think from the information you shared, it does sound like a lot of those activities would be great accompaniments to the digitization work that you're going to be doing. You can include some of the costs of these things. I think especially if you were consulting with local community groups or families, building those costs in as either an advisory board or as individual consultants would be a really great idea. Including some outreach would also be expected. I will defer to colleagues about the amount that would be possible for building a website. I think, yeah, I'd love to hear others' thoughts about that.
We've never really defined sort of the cap for that kind of development cost. And what we've recommended in the past is that you keep those sorts of expenses to a minimum as a percentage of your overall budget. And again, since this is the first iteration of this new program, we don't really have specific reflections on how our reviewers will look at that sort of infrastructure building component, but we anticipate that they will continue to want to see ways that I would say one, sort of a clear explanation of why the building of sort of a standalone website is the best solution to provide the community-centered access that you're looking for. And then also considerations of how that website might be maintained and supported over time. Those are sort of some of the concerns that I could envision. If that's going to be the only place you put your materials, they'll also want to know why you wouldn't be looking for sort of a way to have them aggregated into other collections and searchable in other archives. It's not to say that that would be the solution that's best for your materials. They'll just want to know why you're making these decisions and provide the justification for why that solution is the best for the specific materials that you're nominating. Certainly, we have funded projects in the past that include website development. This is not unexpected with the program, but they're usually very small percentages of the overall budget.
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, so for all of those potential activities that aren't digitization, I'd say just really think about how they relate to the core values. I've put them here on the screen. They're also on our homepage, and really explain how it all relates in your larger product idea.
All right, next up, I could not find a budget template in your resource page. So in other words, the budget summary document that's required in the initial application, there's no template for it. Are templates vital to the Digitizing Hidden Collections grant provided, or will we have to create our own for the budget summary?
I'll take this one. So in the initial application, we are only asking for a summary, a budget summary. So in that summary, there is no template that we ask you to follow specifically. We just want you to give an explanation of your budget lines, defining how you're going to use that within the different criteria that we have in the budget, which would fall under allowable costs: salaries, wages, staff training, costs, consultant fees, equipment, supplies, funds for travel, et cetera. And review our allowable costs section on the applicant handbook, which will tell you exactly how much you should submit for each, or what your limits are in each category and how they're defined. So we just want to get an overall idea of, this is how much money I've asked for this project, and how do I explain it and show us where the money is being utilized or how it will be utilized. If the project is accepted to go to the next round, at that point, you will be given a budget template to utilize going forward.
Yeah, if somebody is really interested in seeing what it looks like right now, we do have it still on our recipient resources page. If you wanted to look and see, it's under the reporting requirements for the program, but we opted to take it off the applicant because it hasn't been finalized yet for the program.
All right, next up. Given the short time frame for the first round application, can additional partners be brought on if an application is accepted for round 2?
I think I can get us started with that one. The answer to that is yes. We will expect that some things may change, especially as you really get into the details of planning your project out if you're accepted to submit a full application. So we would expect some fluctuation there, and you can definitely add partners at that point. We'll expect at that time that you can include those folks on the full application. So you'll add additional collaborators on the form, and you'll want to ensure that they have received all of the information about the IP agreement and other requirements post-funding.
Great. Next up, can funds be used to help build capacity within community member organizations through workshops or the creation of training opportunities, et cetera? And this doesn't specify, but I'm assuming that the capacity building would focus around, digitization or other collections work.
So I'm not sure, are we talking about as in consultants, community building as in consultants fees, or is this for outreach programming?
Yeah, I think more for community member organizations. So like a partner organization. So for example, say the project archivist who comes on to work on the project, learns how to digitize materials and then wants to give a workshop on how to do it to the partners.
I would think that the workshop would be a part of the outreach. It wouldn't be the bulk of the monies and funds being requested, but as the outreach component, I believe that could be paid for. You would have archivists, you can hire consultants for the project, archivists for the project, training, you can pay for training with the funds for your project. So I think that this would be under also possibly as a consultant fee and under your outreach fees. If anybody wanted to add to that.
Yeah, it sounds like a great kind of added activity to share that knowledge that you're obtaining from either about the collections themselves, like work related to the work of archiving, or about the subject matter. So I think that would all be reasonable as long as it's well justified.
Great. And here's a good question. Due to COVID restrictions, we do not currently have physical access to the materials nominated for digitization. Will you allow some flexibility with respect to timelines in these unprecedented times? So who'd like to take that?
I can take it. Sorry, I responded to chat to Lana on this one too. And so, yeah, we will continue to inform and remind our reviewers that some of our applicants may still find themselves in situations like this. So if you need to make best guess estimates about your collections, if you the timeline, you'll have to establish a timeline for your project. you'll have to submit something that falls within the guidelines and is 12, 24, or 36 months. However, the program does allow, if you are awarded funds, no-cost extensions, and we will continue to offer those over the program. I mean, that's not a new thing. We have been granting more of them because of the times that we find ourselves in, but those will continue to be allowed for all of the funded projects.
Great. Next up, is it possible to have a lead principal investigator who is overseeing the project, but who is less involved with the day-to-day tasks of digitization?
I would say yes. I think that's up to how things work locally and who you think will be best for that role. I will note that you'll want to think about how that affects reporting and how you'll gather information, because you'll have one person who will need to submit all of your reports in the end. So they just may need to coordinate a little bit more to get that information about what's been happening day to day.
Great. So next up, we're a little concerned that the CLIR adjudicators will not understand the complexity or the overlap between the Indigenous communities. This is, again, the fiddle, the music collection, from which the recordings stem and with which we are proposing to create partnerships. So we will not be consulting one Indigenous community or getting approval from one tribal council, as might be more common in the US. Okay, is there some way to flag or explain this complexity and scope? So again, the context with First Nations communities in Canada being different than Native American tribal councils. So just worried about there being some misunderstanding. Now, our reviewers will be both Canadian and US reviewers, right?
Yeah. And I would say the panelists that we draw together for our adjudication process are very familiar with extremely complex collaborative projects. And not just in Indigenous communities, but we have funded a number of projects that have had to navigate the complexities of digitizing materials from many different communities. One of the projects that might be something of a model would be, there was a collaborative project between the University of California, Riverside and the Sherman Indian Museum. And in navigating their materials that they held within the museum, they consulted with between 150 and 200 tribes. So there is definitely room in the application process to reflect on the complexities of making sure that the project that you are presenting is respectful of the customs of a wide range of communities. It will probably come out more within the final round, but I think that there are some specific questions related to the voices that you're hoping to amplify, thinking about the project plan and timeline, and where you might put points of interaction or consultation in your project plan that will make it apparent to the reviewers that this is a very complex project involving a lot of different voices.
Great. And and that question was from Sarah, and you can follow up with us with another question if that wasn't, didn't cover all the concerns. All right. Next up, for purposes of building hiring into our timeline, when will applicants be notified that a grant has been awarded?
Well, the initial application deadline is April the 30th. And for those that pass to the next round, will be invited to apply to create a final application. That deadline would be, I believe, November 19th for that final deadline application. Okay, so thank you. So the notification for advancing applications will be completed by July 30th. And then we will also be providing support for advancing
April.
applicants. I'm sorry. Initial
April.
application is April 30th, right? The final deadline for the final application would be November 19th, and a public announcement for funded projects would be April 20th, April 2022. So that you would know to start if you wanted to do grant lines and project staff lines in that, they would be after April. I believe we're doing project start dates of May 1st, correct? Me if I'm wrong? So they would have to at
I think
least
it can
start
be
after
May or June,
May or
right?
June. Okay.
Yeah.
So May or June 1st would be the project start dates. So those would be the dates you'd be looking at for if you wanted to build that into your
Yeah.
proposal.
Well, if they were going to do hiring, if they weren't going to, that wasn't part of the project. Some people do hire a little earlier on the quiet. We do let people know a little bit earlier, right? But yeah, I think your idea.
I think our policy has been that you can't do a public announcement of a position funded through our award until the public announcement of the awards have been made.
Yeah.
So if you weren't asking for to apply any award funds, you would be able to post your job as soon as we made the public announcement on or about April 1st of 2022. If you were applying award funds for the hiring process, then you would have to wait until your project start date.
Great. Thank you. Next, if it is an organizational archive, is it important to discuss potential use beyond the organization? So that is, this applicant is interested in digitizing collections that tell the story of the organization in which they're based. Who would like to take that?
I can start us off. So in the past, it's been really important that materials be openly accessible to as many communities as possible. And I think within our new guidelines, that's still an important consideration. Let me flip to our new core values. You'll see under community-centered access that the phrasing is the program advocates for approaches to access, description, and outreach that make digitized content as widely available and useful as possible within legal and ethical constraints. So that will still continue to be one of the aspects that reviewers will evaluate on. And so thinking about how your materials can be used to the fullest extent possible within those legal or ethical constraints will be important.
Great.
Yeah, the other thought that's coming to mind, though, is that the program is really prioritizing digitization of rare and unique historical and cultural materials. And I think our reviewers will continue to have a broad definition of that and want to see how is it that your organizational archives fit the historical and cultural context. So you'll want to explain how this project is going to contribute to a broad public knowledge discussion. Historically, our reviewers have not been keen to fund institutional archives that will only serve the institution. But again, I don't know what institution you're talking about. And that kind of may speak to our thematic focus this year in a different way than has sort of been in the past. So.
All right, next up, can tuition costs for courses or institutes be included for this grant? One of the aims of our project is to educate scholars of African American literature and digital humanities methods through the completion of the project to intentionally ground our work within the communities it is cultivated from. So if I understand this correctly, this would be the leaders of the project would want to create a course or an institute using the grant deliverables and pay for tuition for attendees to get credit for participation in the courses or institutes that they would create. So alternatively, it could be a course or an institute taught by someone else that was just closely related. But,
yeah, in the chat we have that it's to attend
okay.
a course or institute.
Okay.
This is tricky. Tuition reimbursement and tuition waivers are disallowed are disallowed costs. However, it almost seems like it's being proposed as an outreach component.
Yeah.
So in that way, to me, it sounds like if it was created as if a conference or an outreach component, as in a conference in which this training is being done at a conference, then that to me would fit in an allowable cost. Anybody jump in if they don't agree with that. But as far as tuition waiver or tuition reimbursement, that's a disallowed cost. So I'm trying to understand the question, make sure we're understanding the question carefully. But anybody that would jump in with their interpretation, would be gladly appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we see the question about tuition remission come up a lot at university-based projects that want to hire undergraduate or graduate students as student workers, and they want to pay them wages plus the tuition, pay the university tuition remission through the grant, and that's explicitly disallowed. But this is a different situation,
right
here.
The only way
It looks like we answered her question. So,
okay, that's great.
If there is other follow-up though, and you want to be more specific in what you're asking, you can always email us and we'll write lots of words. So.
All right, next up, for the Digitizing Hidden Special Collections grant, can two separate but related photographic collections be considered within the scope of funding? So my assumption is that this is two separate but related photographic collections being put together to be digitized through the same project proposed.
I can go ahead. So that would be totally reasonable. I think a project can be made up of as many or few collections as defined by your archives, as makes sense for your project scope. So as long as it's within that really defined scope of your idea, I think two collections. We've seen any number of collections be included in a project.
That's great. Next up. Oh, I'm sorry, Joy, did you have something to add?
Nope.
Okay.
Good answer.
All right. Next up, an end goal of our digitization project is to create a centralized database around an all-Black unit during World War II. Second, to create a traveling museum project, so that I'm assuming that's an exhibit. And three, to create a documentary. Would we need to make the digitized materials available to the public immediately after digitizing them? Or can we share the digitized materials after we use them for the final documentary? So that is, can there be an embargo period around the deliverables for the grant? Yes.
I can take this one.
Yeah.
I would, I have some concerns about the creation of a documentary. I don't know, based on your question, if you were considering including award funds for that activity. I would say that is outside the scope of this program and should not be included. We have not seen this particular situation in an application to the program. If I were to extrapolate reviewers' opinions and thoughts on access, I would say they would be extremely hesitant to fund a project that was asking for an embargo on materials that this program was funding so that a documentary could be created in what seems like sort of an exclusive environment for the access point. Now, having said that, we shifted the core value from open access to community-centered access, but I am uncertain if you could make a strong case on why community-centered access would involve an embargo on materials. I think this would be an extremely hard case to make. That doesn't mean you can't try, but I think this would be very, very difficult to justify given the priorities and the core values of this program.
Thank you, Joy. That's very helpful. All right, next and final question for now. Can students be paid wages to be trained in this work? And my reading of that is, if you're hiring student workers, and obviously you should pay them for the work on the grant, can they also be paid for the hours they spend being trained to do the work on the grant?
Yes, salaries and wages are allowable costs for staff members, and so are staff training related to the project, which includes student workers. And as in such, we always want to make sure we see equitable and fair pay for their work. So that would be yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that could either go into salaries and wages, which would mean, if you're doing a week of training, you could just build that into their wages. Or if you're doing a specific training program for them, they're attending something that you've seen out in the wider community, I think that could also be included under staff training or consultant fees. So either way would be fine.
All right, that's the end of our question queue. This has been a really great discussion. So I think, as Joy has said in the chat, we've got about 10 minutes left. We're here for you. So if there are any other burning questions, we'll just pause here to make sure that there aren't any. Yeah,
I think as Becca put up, this is a great time for us to remind you all that We have our email address, and you are more than welcome to email us as the deadline for the initial application approaches. We will be doing our best to respond in a timely fashion to all of the questions that you have. And as we've done with the other webinars, we do have a survey for this webinar, if you don't mind filling that out. It's part of our data collection process to assess the program as we do the program this year. And we have really enjoyed all the feedback that everybody has given us so far. And I think, Krista, we have another question.
We do have one, oh, two questions. First, a point of clarification. Do you need a letter of support from our umbrella organization, which is a university for the first round? So that is, you know, this person is in a separate unit, a library or museum or a department on a university campus, and they want to know if they need a letter for the initial application. There are no letters in the initial application, right?
No, we're not requiring any institutional support letters in the first round.
Yeah, that would be the second round. So nothing to worry about right now. All right, next. So as a follow-up to the embargo question, as long as we make the materials available immediately, then we could use the materials later to create a documentary, correct?
Yes, yeah. That would be fine. It would be supporting the public knowledge value. I'm sure our reviewers would be excited to hear about future projects and how you plan to use the materials. Yes, that's fine.
But just to reiterate the point you made earlier, Joy, about the costs associated with creating a documentary or an exhibit, they're kind of tangential to the scope of the program, right? So keep them out of the budget is the best advice?
Yes, yeah, that would be our advice. We have another question in the chat that I've been watching. So there's a question, are independent contractors included in salaries and wages if a sponsoring organization has few full-time staff? So it depends on how you're hiring them. We do have a budget line for contractors. And typically, if you're hiring as a contractor, we would recommend using that budget line. If you were to hire somebody under salaries and wages, our reviewers would also be accustomed to see what fringe benefits you would be offering. And I'm guessing in a lot of situations with organizations with few full-time staff, it's often, it seems more appropriate to hire the contractor where you would be doing an independent contract and not having to burden the organization with the hiring of a staff member, which is different legally and in terms of tax laws and all of that. So, yeah. There's a line item in our, if you look at our handbook, you'll see that we have allowances for contracts.
Yeah, I'm looking, it's under the budget summary section. There's a section, cost for this program should fall within 6 categories. And the category you're talking about is consultant and training fees. Is that right, Joy?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
One more, I'm sorry.
Yes, one more. To reiterate, no letter is required at this point.
That's correct.
That is correct. No letter is required.
And that's been, for those new to the program, we've always required letters in the second round because we know that getting letters letters of support to support your scholarly ideas or your project materials, the letters from your institution, the letters from the communities. We know these are a burden to get. And so we want to make sure that in this initial application, you are not being burdened with getting documentation from anybody until you have a little bit more certainty about the competitiveness of your application in the pool. So that's why we've always required those not until the final application rounds.
I think we freaked everybody out by now.
Keeping it simple. All right, well, we made it to the hour. Thank you everyone who stuck around. Please remember you can reach us via email at any time. We've really appreciated all your questions and we hope you have a really great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.